to come here to Mexico. And dialogue, it was very, very productive, very interesting panel discussion on topics of trade. Maybe first starting with kind of where we are. I think we're going to talk a bit. We have a lot of topics to cover today, but I think like what should start with is kind of setting a ground layer and talking about actually where we are in terms of trade. So my work now at Bruegel is mostly concerned with trade. So it is kind of demographics and wages, which we're working on, and now mostly in e-commerce and digital economy and structural change. And I think for that topic, we're in very interesting times, scary times, but as an academic of sorts, I think it's very interesting. So maybe to start where we are. So I think everyone is aware of the trade war that is going on between the US and China. And so basically, the US had put tariffs on Chinese goods. They're negotiating right now some kind of settlement, but it's not very clear if that's going to reach anything. So past negotiations of this sort have already failed to kind of end this type of tariffs. And if it doesn't change until mid-November, the US is going to impose more sanctions, and then I think this is why is actually almost all of Chinese exports to the US tariffs. And to get into perspective, the tariff rate used to be 6% for China now. So it's a significant change. And so this is the one part. The US is kind of waging a trade war against the third biggest economy in the world. And so in this trade war, it has not just attacked the Chinese, but also it's attacked some of the allies. It has attacked Mexico, putting tariffs on steel and aluminum. And it has used this also as a pressure to renegotiate the NAFTA trade agreement between Mexico, US, and Canada. And it also has threatened the European Union to put tariffs on automotive. So this is at the moment from the table for legal reasons. It's not very clear it's really from the table. So the deadline expired that legally by US law they are not allowed to put tariffs, but it's not super clear that it's actually. And this whole trade war is kind of changing, is kind of happening in a place where the US is kind of doubting the whole international trading system as we have it right now. So international trade is now governed mostly by WTO, the World Trade Organization rules, which provides a framework, one for all countries to trade with each other, but also for bilateral trade agreements to make it. And what is kind of, for every kind of system of law, you need some kind of judicial system to enforce these laws. Part of this is in the WTO framework. This is the dispute settlement body, which is a body where basically first ad hoc panels decide on disputes between countries, and then you have like some kind of appeal body, which is the appellate body of the WTO, where basically you can appeal against this. So it's kind of the last instance. And since 2017, the US is blocking any new appointments to this body. And by December 10th, more will retire, meaning that then there will be just one member left on this. Or it's not really a court, but technically. And this is not enough to make any rulings, any decisions. That means that we're not having any kind of, this kind of will block the actual dispute settlements between countries. Furthermore, so their reports, as far as I know, they're not confirmed at this moment, but that the US is threatening to block the budget of the World Trade Organization by January 1st, and this would mean that basically they have a budget. So this puts us in a very, very, I think, in a dangerous situation where actually the trade system that we relied upon is in danger. So what does it mean for Mexico? I think Mexico and the European Union are in very interesting countries to kind of study this kind of thing. Because on the one hand, you have the European Union that very much is in favor of this kind of multilateral system. They conducted a lot of trade agreements. Kind of fits the political mechanisms of the European Union, which is very much also a multilateral system in itself. I mean, it has some kind of sovereignty, but still it's a system of treaties. And so it's kind of the logic of this kind of international applies itself very well. Way of thinking and way of behaving. It also applies very well to the values of Europe. On the other hand, you have Mexico, which is a country that which is a medium-sized economy that is very much dependent on the US. So in terms of trade, US is the biggest trading partner. A lot of the trade of Mexico and also a lot of investment is kind of investment into this after area where kind of you can produce in Mexico and then you can kind of sell not just to Mexico also. And as such, it's kind of a country that one is very in the interest of European trade. It's a growing economy. It's a very I think culturally close to European Union, a lot of values are shared. But at the end, it's also kind of in between US and Europe. But at the end, it's also kind of in between US and Mexico.
Has joined the meeting.
So the reason I'm here today is that there is like a global agreement. So there's a trade agreement between the EU and Mexico at the moment, and they're renegotiating this. And this is in the line of a lot of bilateral trade agreements that the EU is conducting at the moment. The reason that they're conducting this at the moment is also the WTO. So one thing is that basically you want to always to. So this trade agreements, they're negotiated always very complex.
Has left the meeting.
The work lawyer about this
Yes.
So these are very, very complex pieces. So they have a very long half-life. The other thing is that so there was the Uruguay rounds of the WTO, which established the dispute settlement model as we have it now, and a lot of the rules that we have now, which was in the 90s. And since then, there's very little reform. The problem of this is kind of that you need unilateral agreement. So there's this perception that the WTO is kind of at the end is a crossroads, at an impasse, and the US is complaining since the early 2000s of all the reasons behind their decision now to block the appellate body. Complaints are there on the table for a long time, and so they say now, okay, we don't anymore. So this has been coming. So this is not surprising. So since there were no reform of WTO, a lot of the things. So one thing what I'm mostly working on is digital trade. So kind of what is the trade in the digital world is something that there is not in the current framework of the WTO. So if you want, there's negotiations on the WTO an agreement on digital trade, but you look on the rounds on the past negotiations in the past years, it's very doubtful that there's going to be any agreement. So basically what the European Union decided is kind of you can do this through bilateral trade agreements. This is the one reason kind of that you cannot. It's very difficult to achieve anything in the WTO, so you do bilateral trade agreements. And the other reason is kind of that there's the threat now, and it's very real, and it's very soon that this kind of is not there anymore. So you need kind of an insurance mechanism. If the WTO rules don't apply anymore, it's not enforceable anymore. WTO stops to being operational. The bilateral trade agreements give certainty to investors. So I think what is maybe the most profound ones are actually alternative dispute settlement agreements that has been reached between Norway and Canada and the European Union, but also basically on other sides, investment settlement. Ways to achieve through bilateral trade agreements kind of compensate for the lack of reform, but also for the risk of it. So what is the reason behind all this? I think there's two strains. So one is what I already mentioned is kind of the lack of reform in the World Trade Organization. The second thing is the rise of China. So one of the claims or the complaints by the US are mostly, actually a lot of them are very legal procedural. It's about the way that the appellate body, so basically the judges, some of them they retire, but they still decide on things after their retirement, things they picked up before the retirement, they still write decision after. And it's things like that there's a 90-day period for writing a report in the appellate body, and sometimes this is set in the treaties, and sometimes they take more time. This kind of things. It's about the compensation of judges. I these kind of reasons is not really a reason why the US would upend the trading system. This is the official complaints, but I think the bigger picture is actually the rise of China and basically perception by the United States that the WTO is not helping them in reaching their geopolitical. This is kind of the connection to US-China trade war. They perceive China as a systemic rival. China has preferential status in the World Trade Organization. It says so basically claims to be a developing country. So you can in the World Trade Organization you can just say I'm a developing country, and then basically you have more time to kind of implement any rulings. And so China does that. So this is one reason. The other reason, but I think that the bigger reason is actually the rise of China. And in the US, it's sometimes, so some people actually talk about the Cold War. I think it's way overdrawn, but this is kind of the spirit. If you listen to some speeches of this kind of Cold War talking, it's perceived as an enemy, and so I think there's this idea that they want to contain China to some extent. The WTO is kind of repeating them. Trade war is one front, and basically the WTO gives some potential treatment for China, but also it's kind of if you have these rules, then you cannot just freely set tariffs. So kind of say you go away with the WTO, the US can actually push for their agenda, and if you have a very, very big economy like the United States, pressure other countries. So I think this is the bigger picture, and the question now is, where should countries and economies, country like European Union and Mexico put itself? How should they kind of put themselves in this whole framework? And so the official policy of the European Union is one still support. We are very much in favor of the multilateral trade system. This is what we want, and we want to do everything to get with world trade. The problem with that stance is that it's not really up to you. Now the question is kind of what else can we do? One way to go is kind of this bilateral trade agreement. Even though you have the WTO might not be effective anymore, or you might have bilateral trade agreement. But the other thing is kind of that really countries have to think about. So the Europe. This is a very big discussion we have right now in Europe. Is kind of how we strengthen actually our economic sovereignty. Thanks in European process. But I think this is a question. So kind of in a lot of way the rules have been written in the times of US dominance. It's still the case, and the question is, should we still operate in this kind of US Europe? So where US takes the lead, should we still operate in this kind of environment? Or should we actually try to become more sovereign? There's like these two camps. So the one says kind of, so there's like this quote of the former German foreign minister Gabriel that says it's very hard to be a vegetarian in a world of carnivores. So kind of saying, okay, it's nice that we support multilateralism, we support a rule-based system, but if you're the only ones that believe in rules, that doesn't help anyone. There's the opposite view, which is more that actually we should support the system. Like it's basically part of our values to have these kind of rules that we don't pressure smaller countries into doing it. And so it's a different question if you ask smaller countries, do they feel pressured by the European Union? That's a very different question. At least there's this idea that there should be like a common rule book that applies very well. And that basically if you much more strongly develop a geopolitical agenda, this would actually have the risk that we become more like a US in the sense of push our agenda regardless of what. Mexico is in a peculiar situation here. USMCA, there's a new trade agreement, so after there was a lot of pressure, political pressure to renegotiate the trade agreement between Canada and Mexico, which is the NAFTA. And it has been renegotiated now. There's some updates, especially in the rules of origin, which kind of say, okay, what's the percentage of kind of Mexican production value, added value in a product that you can basically say it's a Mexican product, and then exported under NAFTA trade laws through the United States. What is happening is basically, for instance, European companies, they set up a factory in Mexico, for instance, because it's a low wage environment. No, it's much cheaper to produce, and you can basically produce here your goods and then sell to US through NAFTA, and basically part of the big access to the not just the Mexican market, but also US and Canada, Canadian market. And basically, the problem is that is sometimes this kind of let's say this typical Volkswagen factory in Puebla, no, like kind of what is actually if everything is produced just in Europe and then shipped to Mexico and just they assemble there, is it actually a Mexican car? And they change the rules. How much is the percentage? This is actually quite significant, but otherwise it's nowadays. It's not really something very. I wouldn't say it's a big thing. And my argument for that is actually that it seems not even that the United States can ratify it. Now there's a lot of political back and forth, but I don't think there's a lot of pressure in this. It's surprising since before it's not just Donald Trump wants to negotiate it, but also Hillary Clinton, his opponent in the presidential election. It was an agreement that was signed by Bill Clinton, but still she shifted her position 180 degrees and said yes. And I think this is maybe my last big point is kind of I think this is a policy. There's sometimes this perception that Donald Trump is a very vulgar, is very ad hoc, it's very it's not like a very diplomatic style of conducting policy. But I think in some of the things that he does are probably Donald Trump's opinions, Donald Trump, what comes up in his head or what comes out some of his like his economic advisor, he's kind of a figure to say the least. So very controversial as an economist. So I think there's very few economists that actually that actually take him very serious as an academic. But so this is their agenda. But I think there's a bigger question here in this kind of a lot of this policy is actually a big shift from the United States that's going on since I think the financial crisis towards the first what was called in Obama the pivot to Asia. So kind of Europe is not that important more. So actually the big systemic rivalry is now China, US. And this kind of perception that US is China is a rival, I think that is shared by the Democrats. And if you read, so Joe Biden is much less clear. I mean, he also Warren actually published trade policy, and it's also very American. So I think this is something that's going to stay with us. It's not just the. So I think to wrap up maybe. I think countries like Europe and Mexico have to think about what's the place in the world basically now. If we live in the future, should we more kind of for Europe, should we be independent? Should we try to get more independent? Where should we position ourselves between China and US? And I think this is even more important for Mexico being quite strongly connected to the United States in terms of a lot of the
Well, thank you, Niklas. That's certainly enlightening, and it opens the door to a series of questions that I'm sure our audience has. But let's start with a few questions to set the stage, a few general questions. First, perhaps very much as a result of the trade war between the US and China, the IMF has recently warned that economic growth for the last quarter of 2019 will probably be the least since the Great Depression. In the context of the trade war, what is your view on the outlook of the world economy in general and world trade in particular?
I think this is a very good question in the sense that So I mean, it's always dangerous as an economist to predict the biggest the biggest fault. I think is always like you can always predict a recession, but that never happens. But I think there is a risk that we are at risk of a recession now, and it's going to be a political recession. It's not going to be like 2008, 2008, where there was kind of an underlying economic problem, but if we have a recession, it might be triggered by this trade war. So every now there's an estimation by the Federal Reserve Board of Washington Federal Reserve Board, basically by the Central Bank of America, that already now global growth has decreased by 1 percentage point due to the trade war, due to uncertainty that was introduced. And 1 percentage point might not sound a lot, but it's actually quite a lot. If you think that normally world economic growth is maybe or something like this, like a third. I don't know what the projections for. I think now we're growing it. But
if you're lucky,
and this is kind of it's we might be at risk of recession of course. The second, I think the second risk that we have is really China. So what is actually, so China now, it has slowed down. The official figures are 6%. There's some arguments for skepticism if this is actually the reality. And there's a lot of systemic problems, I mean, in the Chinese economy. If you're a European economy, you're a lot of what we export to emerging markets, to countries like Mexico or China that kind of develop. I mean, I'm from Germany, we sell a lot of cars and machinery, basic machinery. Just like the aging and stagnant European have to sell all this kind of machinery. This kind of growth coming from. So if China might end up in a recession, I think that the growth rate, maybe not recession, but this is very dangerous for economic reasons, but also for political reasons. So the kind of, I think the societal contract in China is no one has you have no political freedom, but we double your income every 10 years. So this if this doesn't hold anymore, what will be the direction of the establishment? The other part of this question is that no central banker will ever admit that, but I think we're at the end of our wisdom. So in US, Europe, we've been, especially here, we've been at zero bonds, zero interest rate amount velocity. We're doing quantitative easing, so putting a lot of liquidity into markets. And especially if a recession, do we have the tools to actually put more monetary stimulus into the economy if we have a recession? And so we would, in that case, we need fiscal stimulus easily.
there's always the political question, the economic question, but I'd like to move towards matters that are more close to the heart, more to individuals. And in doing so, I refer to some of your prior academic work. You've written on wages, worker mobility, and low reproductive rates in certain areas of Europe, particularly Germany. Considering that there's no sign of a decrease in reproductive rates in Latin America, much less in Mexico, how can Latin America in general and Mexico in particular learn from the European experience in wages and worker mobility? And I have the immigration issue that is happening right now between Mexico and the United States and Central America. What are your thoughts on how can Mexico learn from this?
So basically, this is kind of seems to be true for most countries. And with development, kind of the fertility rate is decreasing. It's kind of that. So this happens in all over the world, and to the point that so there was all this scare of the basic. Still concerned that population growth will be. But it seems so that in the middle of the century, end of the century, population growth, and that's going to decline. I already see that population growth rates are declining in almost all countries. And so I think in terms of sustainability, I don't know. I don't want to make any predictions. So I think this is something that is in the future for Mexico. So there's going to be a decline in fertility already happening and so on. I don't know the numbers for Mexico.
It is happening very slightly, but it is happening. So we speak of worker mobility, of wages, which are close to the heart. Also close to the heart are human rights, and in particular, as regards human rights, we have the right to a suitable, breathable air, a clean environment. And there's not some new trend, but at least it's new for many companies beginning to do work that of corporate social responsibility. So how does Europe protect the environment without sacrificing the fact that it remains one of the world's largest industrial manufacturers and also one of the world's largest importers and exporters?
So I think environment is a topic that is very, very big in Europe at the moment. So we had in the European election, we had a big surge of parties in Europe. And so as a reaction to that, the new incoming European Commission put green policy, and they call it the new Green New Deal, is very, very high on the agenda. So I think this is, I mean, there is some question, but I think it's serious. And I think this is especially because it's supported by the young generation very much. Okay, anyone in Europe, people are very concerned about climate change, environmentalism, plastic pollution. This is a topic that's going to stay with us. But I think we should take this very serious. And actually, there's a problem for Europe in this environment. So there's a claim now the European Commission wants to decarbonize the economy by 2050, which is very ambitious, but I think it's the right target and it's a good target. But this will not do enough. Climate change is a global problem, and the problem for a country community for economy by like European Union is actually, if we know what is our policy to put price on carbon emissions, what you might end up happening is that basically, if you put, for instance, so we already have an emission trading system, well, not everything is covered by that. So they have now discussions about the carbon taxes. If you tax carbon emissions in Europe, what might happen is that just the producers move out of the European Union, a country where there's no tax, then you have no reduction in carbon emissions, and you have basically loss of employment. So there's this very big concern that if we go with this kind of big, that basically the big targets that we set ourselves in decarbonization might have the effect of just pushing carbon emitting industries out of Europe to countries where the basically compliance is very much lower. And so there's a big talk now about carbon border adjustment tax, which is basically a tariff on goods coming into Europe, where we tax not just Europe the emissions of carbon, but also from import. It's a very big discussion. I know it's very difficult, but it's difficult to design this in a way that is WTO compliant. So that's basically not has to be non discriminatory. So there's all kinds of questions. Also, how do you kind of find out what's actually carbon emission? But I think this is a big topic, and for instance, an interesting question. What the environmental policy?
It might not be TBT compliant.
Exactly.
Yeah, those are the things.
Yes.
Right. Well, so much for general questions. Let's turn to the subject that's pretty much on our minds, and that is the main subject of the main topic of our discussion. Let's start with Europe and move on to the rest of the world, including Mexico. There is a lamentable turn to protectionism around the globe. South America, the US, many European jurisdictions. What, as an economist, what is your general opinion on economic and political protectionism and its effect first in the European economy and then in the world economy?
This might not surprise you as an economist. I'm a free trader, so I support the notion of free trade. For the world, for many reasons. First of all, kind of building this kind of global connections has lifted out of poverty millions, hundreds of millions of people who reached no one had believed that we would reach actually the millennium goals. So when they announced, no one believed that we could have poverty. And we did that. And this was a large part of this was kind of globalization. So I think there's a lot of things to cherish and to be in favor of trade. There's, I think, cultural connectiveness. That if you trade with other people, then there's less reason to start wars. I think that the world today, despite the war in Syria and many others, there's a much, much safer place than it used to be last century. If you look at how many people die in conflict. It has also to do with the fact that nowadays it's better for you that there's more to gain from trade than to gain from conquest. And so, I mean, this is a bit too broad statement, but basically my point is I think there's a lot of things to do in trade. And the search of protectionism now, I think, is a question of structural change. So basically, we had with the opening of China and other countries like Mexico, in terms of trade, a lot of the jobs, manufacturing jobs that used to be bread and butter for many people in the United States and Europe, have moved away from Europe. And at the same time, there was technological advancement and a lot of these jobs have been automated. And even though we don't have super high unemployment because of this, it gave, like this manufacturing job gave people an identity. There's some regions that basically live from one specific industry. If this industry moved away, kind of they really were left behind. And I think this kind of, together with the all the kind of economic consequences of the financial crisis, left to this big backlash. But I think it's a wrong path. Certainly.
Well, you've answered the second part of that question. I was going to ask you, just give you a very quick soundbite on how do you address this argument, that this zero-sum argument, that your gain is my loss. You, Mexico, earn a European job, an automaking job, and Europe loses it. The first argument you said was automation, and I agree. Even in Mexico, many jobs have been lost to automation. But how do you address this? How do you address the zero-sum mentality?
I think this mentality is mistaken for me. So basically, there's always this perception, if you talk to politicians, what they care about in terms of trade is exports. So they care about the jobs and basically what they sell. But in the end, why do you trade? It's not about export. It's about imports. It's what can I buy from the other person? I export. So I think sometimes we should think more about like trade in countries like village or something. Now, why do I produce something and sell it? Why do I work? Not because I enjoy work. I mean, I enjoy work, but maybe not just for that. But basically, I get money for that, with which I can buy imports from someone else. This is basically for most people the reason to get up in the morning. And I think the same is true in terms of trade. So why do we export? Why should I care about selling a car? Why should Europe sell a car to Mexico? We don't get anything from that. We gain from that we can actually buy Mexican goods back. And this kind of zero-sumness is, I think, is in that sense mistaken. On the other side of the argument, I think we have to be serious now about the negative consequences of trade, which is kind of the distributional effects. That basically, the people that gain are not the people that lose. I think we have been maybe a bit complacent about that. We have made a lot of advances in globalization over the last decades, but this has changed people's life in dramatic ways, and I think we have to think more about how to compensate people for that, and also how to maybe manage that in some way. Not just to think about industrial policy, and to think about what can we do to actually invest in the regions that are losing. But I think in general, trade is something good. It helps. A way of cooperating and kind of conflict, this kind of zero-sum, it's also just some kind of conflict that I think economically is not there. I think one thing one caveat there, and I think this is like the whole question of socialism. In particular, if you talk about China, so there's a question to which extent, so if you trade with much bigger partners, this is maybe not the pro of the European Union as much as for other countries, like to China and maybe also other European Union, because it's kind of, you have the risk that they push their agenda. The European Union has a very humanistic agenda. It's just headline values that we put on. But the question for a country like China is that the case. So I think we should take the threat that China is posing to many countries. And it's a question kind of how do you manage that? I think there is a conflict. In general, it is a good thing.
Very good. I'm happy to say we have our first audience question, and let me thank Daniela for asking. The question is as follows: most of Mexican imports and exports occur with the United States, and I can say that it's 80%, probably higher. And regardless of this, trade with China has been growing on and on. He says that she believes all of this is due to cost. The U.S. is closer than China, so it makes much more sense to try to trade with the U.S. and China. What would be the competitive advantage of doing business with the European Union? They want you to market the European Union.
Yeah, well, I'll do my best to that extent. I think the competitive, so you have gains from trade if you're different. So the idea is kind of, so basically Econ 101 is the comparative advantage model, basically saying that you're relatively better than I in something. Progress is relative, and then it makes sense for us to trade. If we are the same, there might not be that many benefits. There's still benefits in the sense that you might have more different things you can buy. So basically, you can buy German. So German, I really appreciate that you can buy French cheese, not just. But there's also the advantage, basically, when countries are different, that basically I can stop doing things they are better at than I am, and I will do this. I will do the opposite. And I think European Union and Mexico are actually quite different type of things they produce. So just by the fact that European Union is more developed economically means that the types of goods that European Union are more high value added, so more goods where Mexico produces. I think this is the one reason there's a big gain from manufacturing between the. I think the other thing that the European Union bringing to the table is very much. I think it's also a question of diversification. No? How dependent do you want to be on one big bloc? I think the European Union quite similar in some extent to the United States. We produce more similar than to Mexico, but also it's kind of a way to kind of trade more different things, trade more different partners. And you have, I think, maybe the biggest thing is if you have a company like Volkswagen coming to Mexico, doing a factory, they don't just bring materials; they also bring their know-how. They bring their own people to teach, engineers to teach. They will set up actual schools in the districts to teach engineering schools and this kind of things. If you have the more people you have to come from abroad investing in your country, the more you can earn. And this goes both ways. This is not just a one-way street. Actually, Europe has a lot to learn from Mexico as well. So if we have more interlinkages, we can gain a lot. And Mexico is already trading a lot with the United States, so there's not that much room. But there's a lot of room going upwards.
Fantastic. Esteban Chavez asks a question that is actually on the list of questions we had. His question is, in terms of trade as discussed, and the idea of protectionism, and I would add, Esteban, if I may, isolationism. What would be the effects of Brexit upon EU trade? Would this result in a crisis within the EU's industry?
So, no one knows. So, the thing about Brexit is that no one really knows what is going to happen. I think the most likely scenario is probably there's going to be election and that Boris Johnson might win this election. Maybe he doesn't, then I don't know. If Gordon wins, we might live in a very different world. But so even Boris Johnson, who basically put a very strong Brexit campaign, so when he became prime minister, one of the first things that he did was saying, okay, I'm willing to do a hard Brexit, and he very much pushed this. And in the end, the agreement he reached with the European Union is very similar to what so I think the UK establishments understand that the hard Brexit, which would be very, very bad, is a very high risk. I'm not convinced. I mean, there's always sometimes accidents in history happen. We might still have the risk of another Brexit, but I think probably what will going to happen is going to be this kind of world agreement. And then it's going to be years and years until a new agreement is going to be negotiated. This is not going to be big. So I think Brexit is very significant for Europe in the sense that the first time someone leaves, and it's also that UK used to be like a champion of market-based, liberal market-based policy. Used to be champion of trade in the European Union. and we lose that. No? We lose kind of this kind of liberal voice. Where now the French, for instance, which are much more protectionist, they used to they could in their policy get a bigger voice there. But I don't think it's gonna be shocked. But I don't if it's not gonna be some kind of a hard Brexit as it's called without any agreement. I don't think it's gonna harder growth. It's gonna put some percentage points or it's gonna be painful. But I don't think it's in everyone's interest to settle this. So I'm slightly optimistic.
Okay. Well, Felipe Castro asks a question that is related to the general portion of our conversation. He asks, how can a Mexican company starting to export contribute much like the European does, EU does, to the mitigation of climate change? Bearing in mind that international businesses seldom focus on taking care of the planet because they are looking for more profit. And he poses the question as better sales, larger sales, better shipping, whatever is less costly. What do you think about that?
I think this so it's a great question because this is exactly the reason we do policy. So yes, so it's this kind of old story that it's very difficult to do this kind of things, to be kind of pay your workers well, to be environmentally friendly, if you're very, very competitive. It's kind of, even if you go back to Marx, he makes this argument that it's not a moral problem of the capitalist, it is that basically competition cannot pay his workers well. And I'm not a Marxist in any way, but Marxism, but I think it's interesting to say that, see that even it's very left in ideology. So this is so I think we need everything. We need the government to set goals, to set guidelines. We need the government, and we need the Mexican government in that sense. We actually if they set the right incentives for business, they set the right incentives, then it's not just the company itself that might have a green agenda, but it's also that competitors have to comply with the same rules. It is the consumers. So if the consumers are not willing to pay a markup on environmentally friendly goods, then it's going to be very difficult for the company to be environmental. So I think we need all three players. We need corporate social responsibilities. We need the companies to take environmental things serious. We need the government to set the right incentives and guidelines, and we need the consumers to take environmental. And I see that this is I don't know the internal debate in Mexico very well on this, but in Europe I can see this, that basically also now companies are trying to implement corporate social responsibility, not just because the government is setting this goal, not just because the consumers are asking for it, but also because a lot of young people select their employers based on this. If you're young, and a lot of people, young talented people, want to do something good in the world, and they are more happy to work to a company that actually they feel contributes something good than maybe like an oil.
Thank you, Nicholas. It seems these general questions are triggering questions from our audience, and I'm fascinated by it. We started discussing jobs, and Daphne Uskanga says creating jobs is important, but she thinks, to a very large extent agree, that we often forget the jobs that have already been created, that already exist, that might be lost through trade. The question is, what should happen? What is the current situation with these jobs?
So it's an interesting question. If you read the literature on US literature, I'm not sure, but the same probably applies to Mexico. Well, if you look at you're probably strong because we're very strong labor protection. If you look at what happens during a recession, not that more people are laid off than during another recession. It's actually not that significant. Mm-hmm. What happens is not new people are hired. Right. So basically, you might lose your job, but you find it more difficult to find a new one. So actually, the things that is important in the business cycle is more job creation than job destruction. And so I think this is one thing to keep in mind. And there's, I think, sometimes a tendency for political reasons, asymmetric political reasons, to focus too much on job destruction. So basically, the classic case is basically Donald Trump going through this Whirlpool, I think it was factory that was kind of relocating or wanting to relocate to Mexico. I think there was like 3,000 people working there. I mean, even this is like something that's jobs that are created.
You're talking about the carrier?
Yeah, of course, carrier, I think, yes. Yes. Right. This is kind of jobs that that are created every day. Like, this is kind of insignificant in the scope of the U.S. economy. So I think this is very much in this judgment, and it's very political. It's basically if you lose your job, you know what you lost. No, it's very, you know what you're talking about. So it's very significant for you to fight for your job to be. Basically, the new jobs they're going to be created. They don't have a lot because they don't exist. So I think the political debate focuses too much on job destruction, but we should actually care a lot about job creation and thinking about what the kind of jobs we want. How we create innovative jobs that are provide people living, but also identity.
We have a new question from, I'm assuming it is the same as Daniela, who kindly asked the question before. Before addressing your question, Daniela, I'd like to move to the next topic of discussion, because we may be running out of time. Considering what you have kindly discussed with us, what do you see as the alternatives for the multilateral trading system, especially considering the imminent, I hope, and many hope, temporary demise of the WTO supply line?
Oh, I don't think there is an easy answer. So because I mean, this is if I would have an answer, I probably wouldn't sit here. Yeah. So I think this is something that's right. So the problem is that US is the biggest player in this, and I think the Olympics should be bigger numbers, but US is the big geopolitical player in economics, and if they decide that they don't want a multilateral system of this sort anymore, it's very difficult to imagine a world where basically you can decide W 2.0 without the United States. In the end, I think so. What's going to be the consequences? If this happens, we don't know what's the strategy, but if this happens,
20 days can be an eternity.
Yeah, 20 days in an eternity. If this happens, I think there are going to be a few things that are going to be. I think prediction we can make. One is that it's going to be more power-based. So basically, size will matter more. United States.
We'll go back to the ages of GATT before what?
Yeah. There were going to be less rules, and big players will push smaller players to kind of fulfill their agenda. I think we will see more protectionism. So I mean, the problem that the WTO solved is the kind of coordination problem. The prisoner is the level of trade, that everyone has an incentive to improve their terms of trade for tariffs. And if everyone does that, we're worse off. So what you can do, you can say, okay, everyone decides to kind of to lower the tariffs, and then everyone is better off. This is kind of the idea of the system. This is going to be much more difficult to do in a post-WTO world where you don't have this kind of multilateral. I think we're going to see probably like 3 big blocks, depending on what's decided. I think one thing is going to be the United States and countries around the United States. The second going to be China, and the third going to be the United States. So I think these are the 3 big players we have in trade, and these 3 big players have different ideas about how a post-WTO world will look like. So for Mexico being so dependent or not dependent on the United States, interdependent on the United States, I think it's very clearly that Mexico is going to be in the camp. It's not going to Mexico not going to align itself with China. It's not going to align itself. It's going to align itself. So the question is, what does it mean for the EU?
I'd like to believe we won't continue to place all our eggs in the same basket, but hey, we must face reality. Your question, speaking about the United States being the largest player, sets up my next question. As recently as last Thursday, a group of ministers representing 3 countries expressed at the EU Commission that they found resorting to mandatory adjudication as agreed between the EU, Canada, and Mexico and other countries be counterproductive. In this regard, the publication called Politico has reported that one or a few of the ministers said, and I quote, historically, we tried to create a world order in trade with the United States. Instead of joining forces with the Americans, we would be joining forces with countries such as China and Russia. That's a very strong statement. It means changing camps from one day to another. What do you think about this? You were discussing a while ago that there are two trains of thought, right, in Europe. This would seem to align with the train of thought that if we have the U.S., why would we change it, right? What do you think?
So I think I quite disagree with this statement very much. I think for two reasons. I mean, the first, I think that Russia is not a big player. It's very important geopolitically because of its military power and its kind of willingness to intervene and kind of foreign policy. But in terms of trade, it has leverage on Europe through fossil fuels that a lot of basically eating. Some countries is dependent on gas exports. But in terms of trade, it's not a big player. So I think that the country we have to talk about this. And this is actually, I think, something that I see sometimes in Europe. I think our Russian politics is kind of mistaken in that. Way too much. And the second thing, I mean, Emmanuel also talks about this now. And I think it's mistaken. The second thing is that we should be very careful with whom we make alliances. First of all, so this might be, we don't know what the future will bring, so there's some rules that think that basically EU-China trade will somehow take your US trade. But the matter of fact is right now, EU-US integration, economic integration is much, much higher.
I agree.
So this is not enough. The other thing is, I think, just the values. I mean, China has huge internment camps of its own minorities, where they re-educate them. We have this kind of clash in Hong Kong, where they try to upend Hong Kong democracy. I mean, with all the conflicts that we have in the United States, I think there's some common understanding of values of that we all cherish democracy, that we cherish the rule of law. And despite everything that US sometimes does in foreign policy, I think this is a common understanding that we don't have with China. To pretend that China is like a liberal country and that we share this kind of values, I think.
Before moving on to the last question, I'd like you to take a few minutes to respond. I'd like to thank Esteban Chavez, who appreciates your insight on EU trade and the matter in which we've discussed trade wars. Thank you, Esteban. Thank you for your kind comment. Final question. I'd like your final thoughts on this before we wrap this up. To me, and probably to a few participants, it seems that the EU and Mexico share common values and interests. How do you see our nations strengthening our already close alliance, especially as a result of a renegotiated free trade agreement, in the context of this trade war that is affecting us all? What do you think?
So I think that we should invest in this relationship. There, as you say, there are common values and there are common ideas. I think that there's also like common culture. I studied in Spain, and actually we listened to a lot of Mexican music, and people who travel, there's a lot of back and forth. And actually, if you look in terms of investment, a lot of it is coming from Spain.
Wow.
And I think there's a lot to gain there. And I think this global agreement is the first step. We don't know when it's going to be ratified, how long it's going to take, how difficult it's negotiations right now. But I think it's an important step, and I think on the other end, we have to, on both sides, we have to keep an open discussion on the points where we are now. When this kind of commerce, I think there's still because Mexico is aligning itself quite a lot with the United States. There's a lot of it's not very clear what's the relationship there. We talk about more about I think corruption on the Mexican side, agricultural policy on the European side. I think there's also there, and I think if we keep this discussion open, but I think also we should always cherish kind of the cultural exchange. I think is also important. Building alliances with academia, and there's a lot more.
Well, we have a few minutes left, so I would like to take you up on the ratification and enforcement part of our trade agreement. What do you think needs to be done to fully implement the e-commerce portion of a free trade agreement?
So I think the e-commerce section is like I think it's the first step that there is an e-commerce trade agreement, but I think it's a very small one. So I think there's like if you compare what the U.S.-Mexico trade agreement, U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement does, and the European-Mexico trade agreement does, it's just not halfway there. And I mean, there's one reason to that I think is that in Europe it's not very clear. We don't have a clear agenda in this. I mean, also if you Japan trade agreement, well, we'll see like Japan-US trade agreement. And so I think one thing is that it has to make up its mind. But there's also some very technical problems, which is I think the biggest one is privacy. So we have a very strong privacy law in Europe. And so the problem is for European companies, but also Mexican companies, transfer or process data from European citizens in Mexico. They have basically what are the laws on which you do this? And at the moment, the European Commission says the GDPR, this law applies globally, which means a lot of problems for Mexicans. Basically, a European company cannot transfer data on European citizens to Mexico. Since Mexico has signed in this Mexico-Canada trade agreement, it signed up to the kind of a competitor. To some extent, it's much narrower in its focus system. It's championed by the US. I think it's difficult to kind of make both things work together. I think there's a lot to work.
Okay. Any last thoughts? We have 1 minute left.
I just want to thank for having me here. I think it was a wonderful, very interesting questions from the audience. I think we need to keep the discussion open. So we live in interesting times, maybe sometimes a bit scary times, but I think there's also something. By nature, I'm an optimist. So despite that we might have some big challenges ahead of us, I think there's also a lot of things, positive developments in that. To improve in the EU-Mexico relationships, and there's a lot of promise for more trade between the countries.
Well, challenges are an opportunity for growth. And with that note, I'd like to thank you, Niclas, and all our viewers for joining us for this webinar. Thank you.